So there's all these arguments against them. Ta'rif, imara, manazir al-tariq, and then the stages of the path to God and how they prepare for it. So these are the 6 maqasid. The first 3 he considers essential. And these are basically the Jawahir al-Quran and the Durar. He calls them the jewels and the pearls. So the jewels relate to God and the pearls relate to the path to God, because jewels are more precious than pearls. But you have to dive deep to get the pearls. So that's the challenge. Are you up for it? And then these are the 3 that help us to understand this. So now, Ma'ani wal Ulum, these, if we look, last year in Ramadan, I did Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi's. So I wanted to look, if you remember, those of you who were with me last year, if you remember that he had 7, but he initially had 2, which he called Jumla, and then he had the Tafsil. So the Jumla was that you've been called to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so it's usul al-aqaid, and then what are the ahkam of why you should be. So it's da'wah ila Allah, right? And then bayan a da'wah, it's clarification of that da'wah, and then the bawa'ith, targhib and tarhib. So in other words, what are the incentives for entering into this relationship with your Lord? So the incentives are basically stick and carrot, if you get to psychology, that this is what motivates human beings generally. Not everybody, but generally human beings are motivated by fear and hope, by deterrence, and then by incentives. So at the job, people have an incentive to be on time, because if they don't, there's a deterrent, they get fired. So much of life is really about these 2 aspects of life. If you really think about it, a lot of what you're doing is based on stick and carrot. So then he goes into the detailed tafsil. So he says there's ilm al-rububiyyah, knowing about our Lord, and then nubuwwah, and then al-ma'ad, and then al-ahkam, the legal rulings, the resurrection, the legal, and then the wa'ad and the wa'id, the promise from God and the threat, and then finally the qasas. Al-qasas. So he says no verse in the Quran can be found where you can't find one of these 7 meanings, and some of the verses will have more than one. What's important to remember is Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi most likely read Imam al-Ghazali's, and so he just nuanced it, but it's pretty much the same principles. They're not different, and I would be surprised if he hadn't read him. Because he's after him. Allah yarhamuhu. They're both amazing. And so ta'rif al-mad'u ilay, the definition of to whom men are called, and women, of course. I'm using men in the standard usage, which includes men and women. It's like the X and Y, right? Because genetically, the man has X and Y. Because people say, oh, you're a man, how do you know? Well, I've got Y in me. Like my mom's in me. You've got Y, you've got XX. So you don't understand me, but I can understand you. I don't know if that's true, but something to think about. So the first is so this is what he calls al-kibrit al-ahmar. Kibrit al-ahmar is the red sulfur. And the red sulfur is called the philosopher's stone in the West. The philosopher's stone is what transmutes lead into gold. This is the spiritual philosopher's stone, which he's saying knowledge of God is what will transmute your leaden soul into gold. Once you know God, you are transmuted from a corruptible thing and a toxic thing, which is called the nafs al-amara, to a pure and incorruptible thing, which is a nafs al-mutma'inna. And the alchemical process is through ma'rifah and mujahada. It's through knowledge and struggle. Those are the two. And that's called nafs al-lawama, where you learn and then you practice what you've learned until you reach that. So this is what he called. And so the first one, ma'rifat that, he calls al-yaqut al-ahmar, which is the red ruby, because it's precious. And then he goes into ma'rifat al-sifat, which he calls al-yaqut al-akhab, which is, would be like, there's difference of opinion about it, but it's either a ruby, it's a wardi color, like a rose color, so it's not red, but more rose, or it's grayish blue, Allahu alam. So the Arab colors are difficult. When you get into the dictionaries, they differ on the colors. Like akhdar, in Mauritania, akhdar means blue. And the sky is called khadara. Now, some say the sky is called khadara because the rain comes and turns so it's the itlaq al-musabbab ala sabab. Yeah, the itlaq al-sabab ala al-musabbib, right? So, Allahu alam. But and then people are colorblind too, so people see different. The green and blue, I think, are a problem. Yeah, so people can see green when other people see blue. Is that right? Yeah. So, in any case, whatever it is, it's ma'rifah of the sifat, and then finally topaz. So these are the semi-precious. I mean, they're precious in that they're all from the Quran, but he's saying that he calls them, they have degrees. So I wouldn't use semi-precious. That's not the term he used. That's our term. So I wouldn't use that with the Quran. But they're not as central in his understanding. Like the most important ones are the ones that relate to the essence. So if you look, for instance, at a verse that's in Surah Ash-Shura, it's 9 in Warsh, it's 11 in Hafs. Anyway, this is a good example of a verse about the ma'rifah of the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a lot of people quote the end of the verse, laysa kamithlihi shay. There's nothing like Allah. But actually it's fatiru samawati wal ard. Ja'ala lakum min anfusikum azwaja wa min al-an'ami azwaja yadra'ukum fi. And then it says laysa kamithlihi shay. So I want to read the translation. In Sahih International, it says, the creator of the heavens and the earth, he has made for you from yourselves mates. I don't think that's a good translation, even though that could mean azwaj. And among the cattle, mates, because cattle don't mate. Like some animals mate, like wolves mate. Cows don't mate. Like a bull, he just, anyway. So this is a problem of not knowing English and translating, in my estimation. Allahu a'lam. He multiplies you thereby. There is nothing like unto him, and he is hearing and seeing. Again, mistake. This is a translation of Quran. This is Allah's word, and this is how they're translating it. That and is called a conjunction in the English language. A conjunction means it's related to what preceded it. That and is not waw ataf in Surah Ash-Shura. It's istitnaf. So it actually acts as a period, or as better translated, yet. In other words, in spite of that, yet so because you say and he hears and sees, then it indicates that there's something like him. Whereas the translation there, these are real problems with Revelation and understanding it. Pickthall does a better job, right? Because he calls it pairs, which I think is better. But Arbery actually does the best. Arbery says, the originator of the heavens and the earth, he has appointed for you of yourselves pairs, and pairs also of the cattle, therein multiplying you. Like him, there is not, semicolon. He is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. See, that's a better translation. It's somebody who understands Arabic better than the person that did the Sahih Internet. Again, I'm not trying to find fault in people. I'm just pointing this out because you guys, many of you are reading translations, and you have to understand the limitations of the translations, because most of us, and people have said to me, why don't you translate the Quran? I'm not qualified to really translate the Quran. I mean, that is a very weighty matter for somebody to translate the Quran. So in any case, that verse is telling you something about the essence of God. And one of the things about this verse which fascinates me is he precedes it by saying, and this is my translation for this only. Fatir is the originator, fatara. And in fact, Ibn Abbas had a difficult time understanding what that word meant. And then he saw a Bedouin came with another. They were arguing over a well. And the Bedouin man said to Ibn Abbas, "Ana fatartuhu qablahu." And because Ibn Abbas didn't know that usage of the word. So, and it might be related to father. I don't know. It certainly sounds like it might be a cognate of father, because fatir is the originator. It's the one that did something first. So the fatiru samawati wal ard ja'ala lakum min anfusikum azwaja. He made from your anfus azwaj. The zawj, that's a zawj. Any pair that are opposites is a zawj, right? So it's pairs, it's a binary. So he created you in binaries. And he created the animals in binaries. And this is again reiterated in Surah Yasin. Subhanalladhi khalaqa al-azwaja kullaha mimma tunbit al-ard wa min anfusihim wa mimma la ya'lamun. So he created everything in binaries. So who's a non-binary? Laysa kamithlihi shay. So isn't it interesting that people want to be called non-binaries? In other words, they want to be called God. You can't be a non-binary. Allah made you in a binary condition, and you can't get out of that, no matter how hard you try. You cannot get out of that. You're either a male or a female, or you're a mushkil. And then, interestingly enough, and I will say this, Imam al-Tahanawi, and I don't know how he came up with this, Imam al-Tahanawi, in his famous book on the Mustalahat, when he talks about homosexuality, he said homosexuality is either tab'i, and then he says ay jabilli, it's something that is somebody's born with. Or he says it's min al-i'tiyad, it's something that they have accustomed themselves to. So he actually acknowledges that there are people that are born with this predilection. And then he says it could be for reasons, and he talks about the possible reasons, sometimes related to the parents' relationship or the sexual practices of the parents. But then he says that, and then there are those who only are attracted to the same sex, and then there are those who are attracted to both sexes. So he identifies the bisexual. 250 years ago, he identifies the bisexual. And then he says something extraordinary that I thought. He says, some of these people are outwardly in the form of men, but in reality, they're women. So there are people in the world that feel they're in the wrong body, which is an immense tribulation. And historically, Muslims were actually, these people are very marginalized in Muslim societies, but Muslims were actually quite tolerant of them. They didn't, you'll find these people that they go to weddings, and they, even in Mauritania, they have these people. So these are like mushkil people. But my point being is that Allah is telling us here that we created you, Allah created us in binaries. And you have to, you cannot say you're a non-binary if you're a Muslim. You can't say that. It's just not, it's not acceptable as a Muslim. Now people are going to say, who are you to tell me what's acceptable as a Muslim? Well, I mean, okay, then we just give up religion. Doesn't mean anything. If religion is only what anybody says it is, then what is the religion? It doesn't mean anything. So now you're in pure relativism. And I personally, as somebody that's in a tradition that was inherited and transmitted and handed down, and I'm just a steward. We're caretaker, and I'll be the first to admit I'm a lousy steward compared to the people that went before. I'll be the first to admit that. But this is what we have. This is what I was given. My Sheikh taught me, and then I'm supposed to teach other people, and then people are going to come after me and they'll teach. And then inshallah, it's a great honor to be a link in a chain, but that's all you are. And if you're a weak link, that's tragic for you. But my point is, there is a normative Islam. You can't just make up the religion and say what you think it is or what you want it to be, because it's called Islam, which means submission. It's not called whatever I want. That's not the name of the religion. It's called Islam. What are you submitting to if you decide what it is? What are you submitting to? I mean, that's a question for people to ask themselves.